All right, welcome back. Let's talk about the burden, the debt burden of Nigeria. Something around the region of 140 trillion. Well, more debts, more loans are being collected. We understand, I think there's a 1.1 billion from the AFDB. So sometimes they're in millions and they're in billions of dollars or these foreign currencies. So when we accumulate it, besides, it's both local and foreign debt, by the way. A couple of times we have our local debt way more than our foreign debt. So we just want to look at the entire debt basket, if you allow me to use that term, and how to navigate this part. This government has said one of the things they've done in removing subsidy and allowing free market, taking subsidy from PMS and, of course, the FX market, is the fact that it has allowed them to do more things. And now they've reduced debt servicing that used to be about 96% of our results in terms of revenue to 68, 67% to free up a bit of fund to execute project. But this release by the World Bank saying they're paying about 69 debts or servicing 69 debt across different administration. That's part of the conversation, or the major part of the conversation. We're being joined in the program by the president, the Nigerian Economic Society, Professor Adiola Adenikinju, joins us via Zoom, and Dr. Mark Abani, Coordinating Dean, CIT and Taxation Faculties, joining us from Afikpo in Ebonyi State. Prof and Doctor, thank you so much for coming on the program.
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for having us.
All right, Prof, let's begin. You know, the issue of debt is how do we call it now? It's almost like a broken record. We keep talking about it every now and then. And what in your view, for instance, now we're hearing that there are about 69 debt in total, and it's being serviced by this administration, just like every other administration has serviced debt. But what, in your view, can we do to begin to look critically on how we manage our debts so that we can lessen our burden? I just want you to give just an overview, then we'll go to the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me this morning. I mean, you said it all, that development requires incurring debt. So debt has always been there and will always be there. And also because of the nature of debts that we have, some are medium term, some are long term. So you have debts now, for instance, where the repayment is over 20 years or more. Okay, so that necessarily means that it would, go over several administration and so on and so forth. Now, so in other words, debt is not bad in itself. The question we must ask ourselves is, how do you ensure that the debt will incur net benefit to the country? So that is the key thing. To ensure that debts are anchored on one, your ability to either repay the debt from the investment to which that debt burden is committed. That's one. Two, to ensure that when you are incurring the debt, you are able to measure in terms of what are the benefits to the economy, in terms of how much job is this debt likely to create? How is it going to contribute to infrastructural development? How is it going to reduce poverty? How is it going to promote inclusive growth? How is it going to, promote macroeconomic stability? So in other words, you don't just incur debts without doing proper analysis. And that's one area we have failed, in my view, in the past. Henceforth, we must see that, yes, we need to incur debt because domestic resources are not just enough, to be able to drive growth and drive development, so therefore, we need to find a way of ensuring that we supplement domestic debt with domestic revenue rather with some support, so like debt, but we must ensure that these debts are carefully analyzed, and that's the role that National Assembly also has to play to ensure that these debts are carefully analyzed. In the sense that when we sign on to them, there are clear, parameters of assessments, that they meant, and that for which those debts, will be judged. So once we start doing that, we have those clear parameters. Then, in my view, it becomes a lot easier to be able to tick the box, when you want to incur debt, that this debt is good for the nation, this debt can repay itself, this debt can lead to productivity growth, and this debt, is efficiently utilized, and accountable. Again, some of these debts, they happen under the table, and we don't really know how, the issue around the accountability of those debts. That we need to change.
All right. Let's take it to Dr. Bani. Dr. Bani, I want you to also expatiate on this from what Proffer said about responsible borrowing. If you look at the 2025 budget, and look at some of the very unnecessary things, because that's where it always stems from. At least one of the sources it stems from, where you look at the budget, and then some things look over bloated, some things repetitive, something vague, and then we have this gap in funding when we look at what we are receiving in terms of revenue and what we're spending and the difference, and then what we resort to borrowing. How do we ensure responsible borrowing?
Thank you very much. And indeed, I echo Prof's initial analysis. Part of the issue is not that we have debts, not that these debts go back a number of previous administrations, but how those debts have actually been spent. Now, the very nature, especially of international loans, but all sorts of debts that the country takes on, is that they very often have moratorium periods to allow you use the funds in order to start generating the repayment strategy. Also, a significant number of these loans, apart from short-term 3 to 5 year sort of federal government bonds, which are internal loans, generally to the citizens, from the citizens, these debts span a long time. So debts being taken by the current administration, some of them have got a 40-year lifespan. They've got moratoriums of 3 to 5 years. For instance, the securitization of the Ways and Means bill has now turned it from money that was being printed by the central bank into a debt. That is very good because it has become transparent. And one of the points Prof makes is the lack of transparency around how this money is reported, how this money is taken on board. But that securitization of Ways and Means is over 40 years with a 3-year moratorium on payback at 9% interest rate. Some of the other external loans, especially from people like the IDA of the World Bank, some of them have also got tenures of 20 to 40 years, and many of them are at 1%. So in reality, they are not really such an overhanging issue. The problem is that we need to think carefully about the long-term payback planning on the debts that we are incurring now. So we are in a position where, and these figures always change depending on who's quoting them, so don't hang me on figures. But in the recent past, we sort of have, in terms of external loans, somewhere in the region of $17 billion US, which a lot of them are in payback mode of both capital and principal. And so you are now paying back a significant amount, 5 billion last year, nearly 6 billion last year of capital and principal. This cycle is going to continue, but looking at it now gives us a lot of opportunities because it is expected. There are people who are saying the debt's going to go up to 187 trillion by the end of this year, early next year. This causes debt servicing issues, and a major problem we have is the revenue. So those ratios are important to consider. How we review the fiscal vulnerabilities in our system, and some of these are being addressed by the new tax bills that are being proposed, by some of the other economic steps that are being taken. A lot of them have got very uncomfortable, if not harsh, implications on you and me, the average Nigerian. The principle is that we need, now we've started down that path, we need to continue down that path, take the pain, and plan how we're going to pay back what we have and how we're going to take less loans in the future. The key around all of that is improving our diversification of income. At the moment, 80 to 90% of our revenue comes from oil. with the Trump administration now fracking in the US, which means that US shale, which is comparable to Bonny crude, may start to become an issue in terms of our prices. We need to factor all of these econometric items into how much we borrow, how we plan to pay them back, knowing that generations to come are still going to be paying back what we take now. So it gives us an opportunity for economic reforms. It gives us an opportunity for FX reforms. Some of those FX reforms will be painful in the short term. Some of them may, and it's still a bit early to say, but may be starting to bring some results. For instance, over the last few months with the launch of the new FX window that's transparent, the exchange rate seems to have stabilized. So this gives us a lot of opportunities.
Dr. Bani, you seem to have echoed some of my sentiment about how these burgeoning loans have an impact on you and I. The last time we had a similar conversation, my colleague was talking about how each Nigerian may be indebted to the tune of 700,000 naira. That's in 2025. Perhaps in another 10 years, if this continuing appetite for borrowing is still the narrative, how much will each Nigerian owe in terms of debt, external debt? So I'm coming to you now, Professor Adenikinju. Do you get a sense of a fatigue in this continuing conversation about Nigeria's huge appetite for borrowing? These loans go way back to past administrations. Is there anything that will change significantly? Are they listening to this conversation right now? Is there anything that will change significantly when we have another, hopefully, administration in 2031? And what are the long-term consequences of this continuing appetite for borrowing?
Thank you very much. Well, I think the reality where we are, and it's good to be very realistic. A few weeks ago, I was at the Senate and I made a presentation. If you look at the size of our economy, the size of government budget, we are looking at, in dollar terms, $32 billion. In per capita terms, we're looking at $144 per citizen. Now, that's if government spends, the 47 trillion naira of debt, that trillion naira in the budget. Now, $144 per citizen. You can compare with any country in the world, any comparative country, any country you want to say, okay, look, Nigeria should we make? I mean, that's where you're going to have government providing security, providing education, providing health, doing road, all the things we want government to do. So the reality is that we are really, really very far from where we ought to be. We are really very far. And really, if you look at developed countries, many countries today, there's a developmental state. In Europe, the average size of government is about 50% of GDP. In Nigeria, we're doing about 12%, 13%. And yet, in all of that, we expect, so much from government. So government has to borrow, in the short term. But there's no way around it. If we want to be able to, live, to improve the living standard of the people and build up the private sector. So that, provide those infrastructure that we need for our development and addressing of the developmental challenges. So we need government to borrow. But the question is, and which is where we need to focus, is how do we ensure that these debts that are being incurred meet some metrics? And that's where the National Assembly becomes very important. You see, in the past, the military government can borrow because they are not accountable to anybody. They just take decision and they borrow. But when it comes to to civilian administration, the National Assembly is supposed to provide some catalyst, some oversight, to ensure that this debt that you are incurring, this $1 debt, in the middle to long term is going to provide a net benefit for Nigerians. In terms of, like I said, we are able to repay it, or it's going to enhance productivity of the economy and drive up development. So each debt must be scrutinized, must be, there must be some assessment of those debts. That is the role of National Assembly. And I told them, I advised them that if you set up a National Assembly budget office where you have, experts and models that are ensuring that you put all of these things into debt, and you are looking at 10 years, 20 years, 30 years impact of those debts. You are not just looking at the debt now. You are looking at those debts over 10 years time, 20 years time, and looking at how they are going to impact macroeconomic outcomes in Nigeria.
But Prof, the challenge is some Nigerians will say that they can't rely on the National Assembly to provide the necessary scrutiny for these debts. That in fact, when our appropriations get to the National Assembly, it is certain to be increased when they, mount the figures upon what the allocations that are coming to them. And some would say, okay, perhaps the solution to this is shore up crude oil production, such that we can gain more revenue from forex at that level. But if there is uncertainty around crude oil production, and Dr. Abani has in fact said that there's fracking in the US now, and what is being produced is in the same manner as our own Boni crude. If there is no certainty around our forex, and indeed that will affect the currency, of the naira, are we not thinking about how that will affect the currency in the next couple of decades? Do you worry about a situation where we'll be like Zimbabwe, where a wheelbarrow of currency is inadequate to purchase bread?
I think we are very far away from the Zimbabwe case. We are very far away. And the issue, and again, if the National Assembly is not doing what it ought to do, again, if the press is there, okay, Nigerian citizens are there, we can't abandon our responsibilities and then shout. You see, what you are doing, channels and other media also has to be very, very much critical in terms of ensuring that that there's the freedom of information act that is there that you guys can take advantage of. Citizens have to be enlightened to ask questions. That's very important. Now, the solution we're talking about in terms of driving up of the oil production. Now, those are long-term, medium to long-term things. You can't just you have to bring. There's a whole process before you can move your production from the current level to maybe 3 million barrels per day. It's not what to do in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. So that will take time. And I can also tell you that some of the things that government is doing now, okay, some of the reforms, okay, which is allow the market, taking out distortions, allow market transparency, allow the market system to work, in itself will also help to ensure that, that we don't go the way of Zimbabwe. And Dr. Abani has mentioned it. Look at what is happening, in the foreign exchange market. The exchange rate is more stable. Look at what is happening. Investments are coming to the petroleum sector, the energy, the downstream sector, and so on and so forth. So, as government reforms this system, the cost will be significantly high on the citizens in the short term. But if we persist, and other complementary policies are brought into place, we got a situation where this country, it would be moving in the right direction, if we can use the word. So I'm not necessarily burdened now because the debt may be overwhelmous. It's high, but it's not something that is too concerning for me at present.
As we wind down, let's take it to Dr. Abani. Dr. Abani, I want you to speak to the cost of borrowing. When you go to buy T-bills, for instance, and you see maturation getting to maybe 300 and something days, see 23%. I know on one hand that there is this aggressive move for FX accretion for some of this volatile capital FPIs coming into the country on one hand. But do you think that sometimes the interest we take on some of these, whether it's domestic using bonds, T-bills, or literally collecting from multinational, lateral institutions are quite too expensive for us, because as Proffer said, sometimes we cannot run away from borrowing, but the cost of borrowing is what I want you to speak to.
Okay. Indeed, that's extremely important. Nobody. There's a famous Igbo saying, "Achego." You use money to look for money. And some of that money has to be factored in by collecting debts. But these have costs. So one of the things that is raising all of the temperature right now is the debt servicing costs of these 69 loans that have been taken, that are being paid back. Some of these loans were taken for very good reason. Some of them were taken for our power infrastructure. Some of them were taken for our health infrastructure. And as Prof says, we, the citizens, should be asking, where is the material, where is the dividend of that loan that we are paying back? We can't alter history, but we can change the future. So we need to start asking those questions. Now, one of the costs, that's a hidden cost of this debt, is inflation and interest rates. This government has announced its commitment to break the interest down to 15% rate from the current 34% it is. Very, very ambitious as that is. But one of the key attributes that is affecting that is, one, the cost of servicing our debt. But secondly, some of the loans we are taking are for security. They are for investment. We don't have a physical headroom to be able to make the investments that are required to make the step change. So all of our money is like a typical front of a market woman who has a few goods on her table. She gives her children biscuit from there to go to school. She pays this, she pays that, and at the end of the month, she comes back to whoever is her benefactor and says, my business don't finish because I've eaten my capital. We need to make sure we simplify this in the minds of people. We need to improve our security infrastructure so that more food can hit the tables. If we don't have more food, the majority, the headline inflation rates are on food. That's what people feel. Stomach infrastructure in the very real sense of it. So those are some of the costs of some of this borrowing. The foreign exchange reserves are going all over the place, apart from under President Obasanjo, who actually negotiated the reduction in our loans, took a hit and paid off some things. We've gone back to the same slide tackling. There's a concept in the UK, in the US, that people have credit cards. Oh, I've got £100,000 or $100,000 limit on my credit card. That's a limit. It's not a target. You need to be careful about hitting how much you can borrow. So although we have got good indica, our debt to GDP ratio is breaching the debt management triggers. 40% is the debt management, the DMO office's trigger. We're standing at about 43%. Debt to revenue ratios have also significantly changed. They've exceeded the 30% and are going up. We need more revenue. That requires diversification. A lot of the economic policies being put in place now, provided we stay the course, will start to give those benefits. Otherwise, you will end up having to go back to robbing Peter to pay Paul because we haven't taken the hit. This goes right back to 1983 with the SAP, with all of the things. And whether we like or whether we agree or whether we have ideological differences about external advisors, World Bank and the rest of them, the point is that these things sometimes are a basket. If you pick things you like from the basket, if you pick all the nice apples from the basket, you'll be left with the rotten apples at the end of the day when you're really hungry.
All right, Doctor.
So there is a lot, and transparency must improve.
Absolutely.
Transparency.
Must
hold government to account.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we're doing this. I'm sure we're going to invite you gentlemen to come back when the budget has actually been passed and approved, so that we can look at it critically, because there are gaps. We are provided about 16 trillion or so for debt servicing. So given that signal of our reputation that we can manage this thing. But we must thank you so much, Professor Adeola Adenikinju, President of the Nigerian Economic Society, as well as Dr. Mark Ambani, Coordinating Dean at CITN taxation faculties. Thank you, sirs, for coming on the program. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having us.
Thank you, Prof.
All right, so we will take a quick break. When we come back, it will be time to show you how to secure public spaces, maybe places of worship and all of that. Our security experts will be joining us just in a moment. Join us again.